Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1979 and we're going to be taking a look at Kris Kristofferson, and he's going to be playing through his classic track, Me and Bobby McGee. So let's get Kris up on screen and see how he gets on.
From the diesel down, boy, just before the rain took us all away to New Orleans. I took my harpoon out of my dirty red bandana. I was blowing sad while Bobby sang the blues. With them windshield wipers slapping time and Bobby clapping hands, we finally sang a song that driving knew. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to do. Nothing ain't worth nothing, but it's free. Feeling good was easy, Lord, when Bobby sang the blues. Feeling good was good enough for me. To the California sun, Bobby shared the secrets of my soul, standing right beside me, Lord, through everything I'd done. Every night she kept me from the cold. Then somewhere near Salinas, Lord, I let it slip away, looking for the home I hope she'll find. And I'd trade all my tomorrows for one single yesterday, holding Bobby's body close to mine. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing ain't worth nothing but it's free. Lord, when Bobby sang the blues, buddy, that was good enough for me. Good enough for me, Dorsey Burnett.
I'm just going to jump in here because this performance was a tribute performance for Dorsey Burnett, hence that vocal. But Kris was one of those guys that in the 70s really did write so many hits for other performers. Of course, he's still around now and still performing now, actually, in 2018 and 2019, I believe. But he was one of those guys behind the scenes that did so much writing and had so many hits that were performed by other people. And this is a classic case, Me and Bobby McGee, because Janis Joplin released her own version of this, and it was actually after her death that it was released. And Kris didn't even realize that she'd recorded her own version of it until he heard it after her death. But that was a massive hit for her. That was at #1 for many weeks in the US charts. But Kris certainly had that ability to write a track that could connect with a lot of people, but also write tracks that could be interpreted by different artists so that they could put their stamp on it. And that's something that Kris certainly has said in the past, that he liked listening to other people's versions of his tracks because vocally they would do something different to what he did with the track originally. We can see here that Kris is supplying just a light bit of strumming on the guitar. Because we've got this full band setup and such a full sound, the emphasis isn't really on his guitar, just a light bit of strumming is all that he needs to throw in. You might have seen in other videos a thumb pick that Kris would use and play fingerstyle, and that's certainly something that he did used to do as well as singing at the same time. I always say that singing and playing at the same time doubles the difficulty. Kris had the ability to do that and had the ability to have that solo artist approach to his music, but a lot of other artists did use his songs and have success with them. And Kris isn't one of those guys that got discovered in his teenage years and then had a long, successful career from that point. In fact, when he was 24, he got a degree in English literature, and from that point onwards, through pressure from his family, he went into the military. So in the US Army, Kris was a helicopter pilot, and he was stationed over in West Germany in the early 1960s. And then by the end of that tour in 1965, he returned and was given a position as an English teacher in the army, but he actually left. He turned that position down because he wanted to focus on songwriting. So he left the army altogether, and this wasn't a popular decision with his family, and unfortunately his family disowned him through this decision. And this is the first indication really that Kris had a driving ambition to become a songwriter, to become a musician, because he made a decision that was so unpopular with his family, but he followed it through. So in 1965, Kris is now chasing the dream of being a musician. He moves to Nashville and he has a variety of odd jobs just to pay the bills. He then got a job at Columbia Recording Studios sweeping the floors, and this is where he bumped into June Carter, and he made sure that he gave June one of his tapes and asked if June could play this for Johnny Cash. Unfortunately, it just got put on a pile of other tapes that Johnny would have received, and it never got through to him. So, not giving up at this, Kris actually landed a helicopter in Johnny Cash's front yard, and that certainly got Johnny's attention, to the point where, once he'd listened to the tape that Kris gave him, he decided to record Sunday Morning Coming Down, and at that year's Country Music Awards, Kris Kristofferson then got the Songwriter of the Year award. So it's a great story and is a great representation of the drive that Kris had in order to get his songs listened to. And in 1966, Dave Dudley released his track called Vietnam Blues. And when I say his track, I mean Kris's track. So Kris was now well and truly a songwriter, and throughout the 70s, he gained such success with his songwriting with so many different artists of that time. But let's get back into this performance.
Hey, thank you, girl. McGee.
And there we have it. What a fantastic full sound we get from the band there. And also we could see that backing singers also playing harmonica in there as well. So many different elements that come in and out of that track in order to really fill out the sound. I'm just putting it back to Kris because this performance goes to show that you don't need to have a really wide vocal range and do vocal gymnastics to have a great track that can connect with a lot of people. And Kris was the master of writing tracks that would do that, considering in the 1970s he had so many hits that were attributed or associated with different artists at the time. He was really a big force in that country movement of having outlaw country, in terms of being the opposite of that really overproduced sound coming out of Nashville and being more towards that independently produced, more attitude side of the country sound. And that very much comes out in The Highwayman when Kris joined up with Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash, and Willie Nelson. And it must have been great for those guys to work together, considering that outlaw country background, but also considering that Kris had worked first with Johnny Cash, like I mentioned. And in 1972 was when Kris released his album called Jesus is a Capricorn. And initially, the sales were a little bit slow with the album, but then he released his single, which was called Why Me, from that album, and things really started to take off to the point where it got to number 1 in the US country charts, but also ended up selling over 1 million copies. So throughout the 70s, Kris just kept recording albums himself as a solo artist, but then also did some collaboration albums. He did 3, I think, with Rita Coolidge, who he married in 1973. He also did 1 with Dolly Parton, and in the 70s and mid-70s is when he started really to get into acting. And I think that a lot of the younger generation would have seen Kris in acting roles and not really understood or appreciated that he was an artist in his own right musically, and such a great songwriter. So the amount of acting that he has done, I think a lot of people just might think that he's an actor, but it's great that we can look at these videos to really set the record straight, to show that Kris has written so many hits for so many different artists, but has also made that transition over to acting. And just to emphasize that point, in 1975, for A Star Was Born, Kris got the Golden Globe for Best Actor. I think that a lot of people at the time would have known that Kris was an artist himself and a great songwriter, but then more recently, the younger generation will know Kris from the Blade series of films with Wesley Snipes and the work that he did in those. But Kris Kristofferson, a fantastic artist and songwriter, one of those guys that had that drive in order to make a success of himself, because more often than not, it's not the talent that gets you the success, it's the hard work. And Kris was a great example of that, just not taking no for an answer and getting himself in front of the people that he wanted to be seen by. A great example of this track as well, Me and Bobby McGee, and the fact that a lot of his tracks were then covered by other artists who put their own stamp on it. For example, this one with Janis Joplin. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!